Civil War is the latest film directed by Alex Garland.
And despite the title and the marketing strategy, this film has very little to say about actual current American politics. It doesn't seem interested at all in developing into the current climate of America. But despite all that, I really enjoyed this film. This is Alex Garland's fourth directed film. He has many writing credits, producing credits over other movies, and even a television series. And he's also an author, so he definitely is surrounded by the industry. And it's shocking to hear that this might be his last directed film. Most of his films seem to gain polarizing responses. But Civil War is going to be no different, and my biggest take coming out of it is it's mostly due to the marketing, not actually the content of the film. When this film was originally marketed, we were advertised as this big budget war film. And if anything, people were really concerned about this being too overly political. We saw the map of the different factions within the United States. We heard about the Texas-California alliance. We saw Nick Offerman as this president, and a lot of people were trying to predict which specific president he was trying to impersonate. And so to many people's surprise, this film really isn't interested in developing any of that. We get little to no backstory of how this war actually started. Nothing is communicated to us about where these sides actually stand or what they believe in. The film operates in this extremely neutral, apolitical stance. And I think that's even intentional with choosing California and Texas as being the two main states that are rebelling against the rest of the country. Due to California being more liberal and Texas being conservative, you can't really look at the two of them teaming up and make a definitive stance which side they are actually on. So what is this film then? This film follows photojournalists as they travel from New York to DC to try to get as many shots of the war as they can. And that's essentially what the movie is. It's a road trip flick studying these characters and their response to this tragedy as they travel across the country and come in contact with many different communities. And we really get this overarching picture of how different states and how different people are reacting to the war. Some people are on the front lines fighting in their own neighborhoods. Other people have gone rogue and aren't really necessarily fighting for a side, but just taking advantage of the situation by looting, murdering other people. And then there's some communities that choose to ignore it completely. And that seems to be the main driving force of our characters, is trying not to stay neutral and wanting to contribute in some meaningful way. And for them, it is by taking photos and sharing it with the rest of the world. Two of the main characters, played by Kirsten Dunst and Kaylee Spaney, both communicate that their parents are just living on a farm in the middle of nowhere pretending like this war isn't happening. It's a very explicit exposition of their motivation, but that kind of gives us everything we need to know about why they are doing what they are doing. They feel like this war is relevant and their family isn't paying attention to what is happening out there, and so they brought it upon themselves to tell the story that other people aren't telling. I think the most political this film gets is acknowledging that the current president, played by Nick Offerman, hasn't been interviewed in over a year and shoots journalists on sight if they even go near him. And that's kind of the major and only theme of this film, is the importance of freedom of speech and the appreciation for journalists. And so I've seen a lot of critiques of this film for its lack of political message, and I do understand that take, because I think there is a world where if you are given this large of a budget to put your film in an IMAX screen, there does seem to be some sort of responsibility to take advantage of that situation and make a statement that people can learn from. I do not personally agree with the stance that this film isn't saying anything, because like I mentioned, there are themes there. I think the themes could be very obvious and surface level, or you could even disagree with the message and want it to say more. But to argue that there are no themes, I think is just admitting that the film didn't tell the story that you wanted it to tell. And I don't even blame people for walking out of this film not enjoying it because of that, because I do agree that there was some misleading marketing and kind of a bait and switch to get people into the theaters. I just don't think that always affects my viewing of films like this, because I don't ever want to criticize a movie for not being what I thought it should be. And so in this situation, I'm just kind of taking in the film for what it is. And for what it is, I actually enjoyed. So themes and political messaging aside, there are so many other things to love about this film. I think on a technical level, there are a lot of interesting things that Alex Garland does, specifically with the final third act. There are incredible sequences of war, and it almost feels like a video game throughout this entire film, kind of moving from place to place, meeting new characters. But especially the last action sequence, you can feel yourself on the front lines running through these obstacles, trying to get to the end goal. And it's effective, especially on the IMAX screen. For a movie that doesn't really care about depicting war, when it does choose to do that, very rarely, it's very successful. I don't think I've ever experienced such realistic gunshots, and the way that they are depicted almost operate as jump scares. In fact, I would classify this as more of a horror movie than most horror movies that we see in theaters these days. And I briefly mentioned some of the cast, but they all did a phenomenal job. I'll give another shout out to Cailee Spaeny because she is definitely a newcomer within the film industry. I know a lot of us saw her in Priscilla, and you've probably seen her in some minor roles up until this point. But she absolutely steals the show, and I think her character does have this dark, twisted arc to her that really is contrasted by Kirsten Dunst's character, where they kind of start off on opposite emotional journeys, especially their relationship to war, and then they overlap and cross over to the other side. And I think there is something especially special about seeing these two actresses portray these characters, knowing that Cailee Spaeny's biggest role was a Sofia Coppola joint, and up until this point, Kirsten Dunst has always been Sophia's girl. So it's almost like this handing off the baton to the next generation. But what we are handing off to her isn't the most positive. And I don't even think this movie is trying to make a positive statement on photojournalists. All I'm saying is that I think it was very intentional to make them very cold, make them very emotionally distant, and you can definitely disagree that that is a positive message and one that needs to be on screen. But to me, it was effective enough, and I haven't stopped thinking about this movie since. But like I keep saying, this is definitely going to be another polarizing film from Alex Garland. Potentially his last, but I would be very upset if this is the last thing we see him do for the movie industry. But that's Civil War, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So please comment below if you have seen this film. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you next time.